All right, the big announcement. We are moving to Green Bay, Wisconsin. I'm going, where's Wisconsin? So the next day, my father comes home with a map. He said, this is the state of Wisconsin. And he's looking, Green Bay. It ain't on the map. And I'm going, well, I'm not moving any place that's not on the map. And he said, when I am done, it will be on that map. And you'll know exactly, Susan, where you lived.
Lombardi. A certain magic still lingers in the very name. It speaks of duels in the snow and cold November months.
Vince Lombardi had a tremendous record as head coach of the National Football League.
There was an energy about him.
Now let's go.
Whether he motivated through logic or fear, he didn't give a damn.
Lombardi was the greatest leader I've ever known.
Could Napoleon have been as successful if he didn't have the ego? That's what drives him.
Title Town, USA it is. It's a happy day at Green Bay. Come on, move on.
He had an obsession that was deeper than anyone else's.
And the Green Bay Packers are going to be world champions.
You have to know Vince Lombardi. And if you don't know history.
Winning isn't everything, but it's the only thing. Winning, well, I think it's only natural that anyone would think that to win is important. That's the reason you're in this business. If you have any kind of pride or any kind of dedication or any kind of backbone or spunk to you, you should try to be the best in your own profession, regardless of what it is. Anybody who has the idea that just to play or just to take part and that's all that's necessary, I think he's in the wrong business. I think he's in the wrong country. Let me put it that way. I think one of the things that made America great is to try to be the best in everything that they do. And the best, again, is signified by winning.
In the winter of 1959, Vince Lombardi, a born and bred New Yorker, packed up himself and his family and drove to pro football's farthest outpost, Green Bay, Wisconsin. It may have been the Siberia of the NFL, but to the new head coach of the Packers, Green Bay marked the end of a long and frustrating road that began 45 years earlier.
I was born on June 11th, 1913. I was born in the old Sheepshead Bay section of Brooklyn. My father was a meat cutter first and then went into business for himself in the wholesale meat business. He worked hard and he expected us to be the same way.
My father was very heavily tattooed. He had tattoos on his fingers. One hand said work, had W-O-R-K, and the other one was play, P-L-A-Y.
Work and play, sort of the dichotomy of life. I'm not sure how much Harry Lombardi got to play. He worked most of the time.
As the boys grew up, they went to work in that meat packing. And they were carrying half of a cow. And I think that was my grandfather's way of teaching discipline.
Hauling meat held little appeal to the Lombardi's eldest son, Vince, who was urged onto a more spiritual path by his mother, Matilda.
We've always been made aware of the importance of church. Our grade schools were always Catholic schools. Then became an altar boy, and he enjoyed it.
I don't think you can understand Lombardi without understanding the role of religion in his life.
Vince's faith was so profound that at 15 he had visions of becoming Father Lombardi. He even enrolled in a school that prepared teenage boys for the priesthood. But short of completing his study, he had a change of heart.
I think he left for a couple of reasons. One is he liked girls, and the other is he liked football. And neither of those could be done at Cathedral Prep.
But rather than abandon his faith, Vince found a way to balance it with football. Rising from the Brooklyn sandlots to high school prominence, he became the first Lombardi to attend college when he accepted a scholarship to the Jesuit school, Fordham University. When he arrived at the Bronx campus as a freshman in 1933, Fordham was a national football power.
Number 40, right guard. Not the most talented, but he was tenacious and never quit.
Nearsighted and colorblind. Doesn't matter for an offensive lineman. You don't have to see too far.
Removed from the sheltered world of his Italian neighborhood, Vince was being exposed to the harsh realities of life.
A teammate of his made a comment, "Lombardi, come over here and stand next to this other fellow. I want to see which one of you is the darker complexion." To an Italian, that was a pretty good insult. And a fight ensued. They both ended up in the infirmary. And my dad really thought his football career at Fordham was over, that he was going to get thrown out of school as a consequence.
Though Lombardi's suspension lasted only days, his sensitivity to prejudice would stay with him for a lifetime.
It was an era when that sort of discrimination against Italians was commonplace. It was one of the driving forces of Lombardi's life. He had something to prove, and that drove him to achieve even more.
As did the lessons he took from the Jesuits.
The Jesuits were rigorous academics, and you were pushed to be the best that you can be with what you have, academically, sports-wise, whatever.
It was the striving for perfection and the giving of everything that Lombardi took out of the Jesuits and brought to his entire life afterwards.
Lombardi was often injured and sat out much of his first 3 seasons. Once healthy, he played both offense and defense and became a fixture on Fordham's celebrated line, which was never better than during a showdown with national power Pittsburgh, a game that came down to a goal line stand.
Bobby LaRue crashes the line, only to find Fordham's magnificent forward wall holding him at the line of scrimmage.
The game ended in a scoreless tie, and Fordham remained unbeaten.
It was his proudest moment as a football player. He was one of the heroes of that great game in their finest season.
The Fordham line wrote itself into college football lore, and the undersized Lombardi was immortalized as one of the 7 blocks of granite.
He wasn't a great player, but he was part of this group. And that's what the 7 blocks represent, this group all working in concert.
For a couple of years after graduation, Lombardi was at loose ends. He gave law school a try, but after 1 semester, dropped out.
He kind of knocked around, played a little semi-pro football. And as I recall, he worked for a collection agency and wasn't thrilled with that.
At 26, Lombardi was still looking for a career when an unexpected offer came his way. When he was asked to be an assistant high school coach, Lombardi jumped at the chance, though it was the other part of the job that piqued his interest.
My dad taught at St. Cecilia's High School in Englewood, New Jersey, which is a immediate suburb of New York City. Taught chemistry, physics, and Latin. And he was a very good teacher.
I can remember he threw an eraser at my wife one time because she was gabbing in the back of the classroom. He was a stickler to make sure that you understood the subject. He did take time for kids who were a little slower, and he was patient with them.
His patience in the classroom translated to the football field and helped elevate him from assistant to head coach.
I remember when we came out for practice before the season began, he had a football there, and he said, "This is a football." And he took the football and threw it away, and he said, "That's the last you're going to see of a football for 2 weeks." For 2 weeks, it was merciless calisthenics. The practices were not only long, but difficult. We went into the evening. We would be scrimmaging under headlights from cars.
He was a great believer in the fundamentals. I want you to block, 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 and run, 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 and boom. He was that way, you know. And it makes you say, they don't belong on the same field with you, you know. I thought to myself, you're talking about the guys out there, they're a foot over my head, they're about 30 pounds heavier than me. They're killing me out there. But you get to the point where you say, geez, maybe he's right. Maybe he knows something that I don't know, you know? And you start playing maybe a little over your head.
Lombardi spent 8 years at St. Cecilia's, 5 as head coach. The tiny Catholic school had an enrollment of 300, but won 6 straight parochial school state titles and racked up a consecutive streak of 32 unbeaten games. Somehow, St. Cecilia's was beating schools with 10 times its student body.
You have to attribute that to him, see? He was the difference. He knew how to get the most out of his players. He was a genius at that.
Lombardi had a natural gift for leadership, which the basketball team soon discovered.
Vince never played it, Vince never coached it. He goes to the library, and he gets a book by the head coach at SMU, who wrote this book like, I don't know, 15, 20 years earlier, when the center jump was after every basket. Using that book as his guide, you gotta make so many passes. That's what you gotta make, so many passes. I don't care if you're standing alone, but you gotta make so many passes. So he coaches out of this textbook, which becomes his Bible, and he wins a state championship.
He didn't know much about basketball, but he knew about people. He's a master psychologist. He rode me, he embarrassed me, and you know, he hounded me. But he never let me leave the gym without coming over and patting me on the butt, saying, Mick, today was a tough day, tomorrow's gonna be a better day. He just made me want to play harder.
He loved the sensation of developing a team and then prevailing. That addiction of winning sort of hit him at St. Cecilia, and he realized that this is what he could do.
I think coaching is teaching, see? So I don't think there's any difference whether you teach on the football field or whether you teach in the classroom, right? They're both exactly the same. It's a question of a good teacher puts across what he must put across to his pupils. Whether it's done on the football field or whether it's done in the classroom is one and the same thing.
While at St. Cecilia's, Lombardi found a clear path to his future. In 1940, he married Marie Planitz, his college sweetheart and the only girl he ever dated. Within 2 years, son Vincent was born. Daughter Susan arrived 5 years after that. Almost from the start, Marie discovered she wasn't Vince's only love.
They were in their honeymoon, and my father turned to my mother and says, well, honeymoon's over. I gotta go home, go to St. Cecilia's training camp.
I honestly believe that she taught herself football, and she made up her mind that she was going to try to become a part of his life.
They had ups and downs in their marriage, almost always related to the fact that he was obsessed with something else, and that football was indeed his mistress.
By the time Lombardi was in his mid-30s, leading a small high school team no longer satisfied his growing passion for coaching. He had bigger dreams and thought he could fulfill them at his alma mater.
He moved on to Fordham as an assistant coach with the belief that he would be the next head coach. But Lombardi was basically shut out and completely disappointed, and the frustration started.
He knew all the guys who coach on the Red Blanket Army seemed to get head coaching jobs. So he said, I'll see if I can get up there, because he wanted now to make his big step. And he also knew he could learn from Blake.
I was a neophyte as far as football was concerned until I went to West Point. Of course, Red Blake was the #1 coach in the country.
In 1949, short of coaching his own team, Lombardi got the next best thing, the chance to run the offensive backfield at Perennial Power Army, where he worshipped at the altar of Red Blake.
I've got to give him all the credit for whatever I know in football. As far as organization of practices, organization of thinking, particularly as far as film is concerned.
Blake was a fanatic over studying film and preparing and breaking down game film and the opposition. At West Point, they were up in the turret of the athletic building, studying film day and night.
Lombardi followed to the letter Blake's painstaking approach to detail, and in his first 2 years at Army, the team lost only 1 game. But Lombardi's uncompromising work ethic took its toll on his family.
He would come home fairly late at night, distracted, pull into the wrong driveway and walk into the wrong house. Physically, he'd be home. Mentally, he was always somewhere else.
And I don't think Marie handled that very well. This separate life of his of football. Marie started to enjoy drinking at that point. It was an escape for her because Vin wasn't there all the time for her.
To the exclusion of everything else, Lombardi was focused on football and his relentless pursuit of a head coaching job. He hoped West Point would be the catalyst for such a move.
Air Force was looking for a coach. Notre Dame was looking for a coach, but he wasn't getting much attention.
He applied for the head job at Wake Forest. Vince got a call from one of the people who interviewed him down there, who liked him and wanted to hire him, and said, Vince, you better look around and do something else, because I am convinced they're not gonna hire a head coach whose name ends in a vowel. And ending in a vowel equals Italian-American.
At Army, over the course of those 5 years, I think the frustration built. He started to see some of the other assistant coaches getting head coaching jobs elsewhere, and Lombardi was being passed up.
But in 1953, Lombardi felt a glimmer of hope when the New York Giants went looking for a head coach. Wellington Mara, a Fordham classmate of Lombardi's and son of the team's owner, was leading the search. Rumor had it that Lombardi was their man.
Would have been a dream come true to be the head coach of the Giants, where they're, born and raised and have friends and family.
It turned out that, in fact, the Maras were more interested in his boss, Red Blake, and thought that maybe he would come to New York to be the coach.
Blake turned the Giants down, but recommended that they hire Lombardi to run their offense. It wasn't ideal to be an assistant at 41, but at least he'd be coaching grown men and not boys.
When we got him, he was really raw, and he liked to treat us like we were in high school. That didn't go over too well with some of the guys we had playing.
So there was a bit of a disconnect. Behind his back, some of those veteran guys were kind of...
We could really get to him in little ways. We'd take the chalk away from him, and he'd just get furious, screaming, yelling, "Who took my chalk?" We didn't dislike him or anything. We just thought he was kind of weird, because no one in the professional game, coached like that. When he did some silly things like yelling, barking, giving you a lap or something like that, it got to a point where he was laughable.
Lombardi's transition to the pro game was a humbling experience. So much so that he sought advice from an unlikely source.
Charlie Connolly was my roommate. One night, Lombardi came into our room. He literally said, "What am I doing wrong?"
I had some definite ideas, some of which were good and some of which were not so good. And I got some great deal of help from some of the Giant players, such as Frank Gifford and Charlie Connolly. I had to change my way of thinking in many, many areas.
Then all of a sudden, football knowledge began to pour out of him. He became a success with us when he became one of the guys.
By 1956, Lombardi had fully adjusted to the NFL. He centered the offense around Frank Gifford. Gifford responded with his best season. With equally outstanding defense led by another promising assistant, Tom Landry, the Giants went to the championship game.
On an icy field before 56,836, the mighty Bears kick off the World Championship game in Yankee Stadium.
Tom literally was the head coach of the defense. Jim Lee Howell, the head coach, didn't get involved in any of it. He didn't understand it. Lombardi would become the head coach of the offense.
Connolly now throws the final touchdown to Gifford, and the Giants become world champions in a stunning, tremendous 47-7 win over the Chicago Bears, the monsters of the Midway.
In 1958, the assistant coaches led the Giants back to the title game, where they faced Johnny Unitas and the Baltimore Colts. The Giants lost in overtime, but history would remember it as the greatest game ever played.
And the Baltimore Colts are the champions of the world.
The game helped elevate pro football to an American religion, and the little-known assistant coach standing on the Giants' sideline would become its patron saint. For now, however, the climax to the NFL's first sudden death finish lingered with the 45 million viewers who witnessed it on national television. As those images slowly began to fade, Lombardi would emerge from the shadows.
I had felt that I had done what I could for the Giants, really, and I just felt that it was time for me to move, really, and I made it a point to try to move. I couldn't do anything with the Giants. I couldn't advance anymore. I had to be more or less accept what I was with the Giants, and that's what it was. And otherwise, I was status quo as far as the Giants were concerned. I wasn't going to be satisfied as an assistant coach, and I wanted to be a head coach of a professional football team, and Green Bay gave me the chance to be one.
In January 1959, Green Bay, Wisconsin saw the dawning of a new era. The smallest NFL city had seen its once proud franchise reduced to a last-place team that won a single game in 1958. Disgusted fans had seen enough and hung team president Dominik Olejniczak in effigy.
They were really in danger of actually losing their franchise. It was a very vulnerable situation.
We were hoping change would come. I get a kick out of people saying, well, we expected something. No one expected Coach Lombardi.
He was completely ready. He had a fire in him unlike any other coach. It's a fact that he had those 20 years in the vineyards, preparing himself, thinking that he was better than people realized. All of those frustrations made the great Lombardi possible.
When Lombardi came in, he said, I know there's a board of directors, and he says, I want to make one thing perfectly clear. I'm in charge here.
Even though his only head coaching experience was limited to high school, the 45-year-old Lombardi also insisted on becoming general manager. Since the Packers were community-owned, it was up to the executive board and team president Olejniczak to address Lombardi's demands.
Olejniczak, he treated like a janitor.
Early on, they played a inter-squad game, and Lombardi sat up in the stands, and Olejniczak came down the next day, and he said, here's a list of things that the board of directors said were wrong. And Lombardi took the paper, crumpled it up, threw it on the ground. He says, I'll coach the goddamn team.
You got to remember something. Vince worked so hard to get where he got. Failure could not be an option because he always believed in his heart he'd never get another chance.
Tell you how proud we are to have you a part of the Packers, just as you should be proud to be here, to be a part of this team.
When he walked into the meeting and he looked us right in the eye, he said, gentlemen, we're going to relentlessly chase perfection, knowing full well we won't catch it because nothing is perfect. But we're going to relentlessly, and that's how he blurted it, chase it, because in the process we will catch excellence. He said, I'm not remotely interested in being just good. Holy mackerel, man, I was just up like this. I didn't even need a seat to sit on. I was like this, ready to go.
In August 1959, Green Bay's new head coach opened his first training camp.
I was in a Marine boot camp for 2 years. I knew all about how tough it was, and these things were picnics compared to what he did. Come on the field, at first he took a lap. We thought it was fine. Then the receivers would go out and run patterns. And he'd say, okay, now we start practice. And then we went to up-down.
Let's go now. Pick it up.
And up-down is running in place. When he says front, you hit your belly, back, you hit your back. And you would do that to the point of exhaustion. Guys would lose consciousness on the field, vomiting. It wasn't uncommon to see a guy just keel over.
It was unbelievable. We all just looked at each other. We couldn't believe this guy's crazy.
Big thing is that he recognized the talent which was there.
We had a lot of talent. Nitschke, Jimmy Taylor, Ringo, myself, Forrest Gregg, Horning, Starr. There were 13 guys who were Pro Bowl, All-Pro, or Hall of Fame on that 58 team. And we were 110-1.
I believe we'll have a nucleus about which we can build the future.
Lombardi's first official game as head coach had finally arrived. Hosting the Bears, Green Bay pulled off an upset, winning 9-6. It was only the first game of the season, but the Packers celebrated as if they had won the championship.
I think it was self-preservation. Make him happy, maybe he'll be nicer on us tomorrow, but I don't know.
The Packers ended up with a 7-5 record, their first winning season in 11 years. Now that his authority went unchallenged, Lombardi was free to instill in his players the same values that had been driven into him.
I think the Jesuit influence was there, you know, the discipline, the striving for excellence.
And he really incorporated a lot of that into both his personality and the way he conceived of a football team.
You either had to believe in him and live to his values and his discipline and everything he was about, or you're out of here.
After a dismal decade, the Packers were responding to Lombardi's leadership.
Too slow getting in there. Man had his man way the hell back here. You never get to the hole.
The teacher was schooling his players on everything from how to read a defense to how to tell time.
Lombardi time is early time.
A minimum 5 minutes early.
10 minutes early.
15 minutes early.
We all ran on Lombardi time.
Yeah, we all became compulsive punctuals.
The first time I went to, the bus was to leave at 11 o'clock. I got there at 10 of 11. I was 5 minutes late.
Come on, run.
As trivial as it seemed, there was a method to his madness.
I really think what was behind it was these guys were his guys. They were playing his game under his auspices. And he wanted them to accept what he said, and then that became gospel.
Here was a man that I just liked from the day we met him in that first meeting. But because I had not shown much in his eyes, I had to work my way up there.
A 17th round draft pick in 1956 out of Alabama, Bart Starr had little to show for his brief NFL career. He now had to prove he could be the leader Lombardi wanted him to be. That process would start on the practice field.
I throw a pass and it's tipped. The ball is intercepted. And he is chewing my you-know-what out. Just unbelievable. So I said, Coach, may I see you after practice? He said, sure. So I went down into his office and said, Coach, I can take your chewing. That doesn't bother me. And I said, yet you chew my you-know-what out in front of the entire team, and yet you want me to be leading that team. Please don't chew me out in front of them. If you want to chew me out for something, please do it here in your office. He never, ever chewed me out in practice again. I think it was a turning point.
He turned a lot of players around. And don't forget one thing, you can't coach if the player hasn't been taught.
Here's what they do in tests.
And he taught.
I'm saying you have to change every time, you see, and you shouldn't change every time. But I can say this, I think this is a sure pass.
You're always kind of saving a little bit to stay alive, you know. You're not giving him everything you got, but you're giving him quite a bit. And he wanted every ounce of ability you had. And he would not relent, and he wouldn't stop until you gave it to him. I jumped off sides one time in a scrimmage, and he got in my face, and he said, "Mister, the concentration period of a college student is 5 minutes, high school is 3 minutes, kindergarten is 30 seconds. You don't even have that, so where's that put you?" Put me checking my shoe shine. I go up in the locker room, sitting there, chin in my hand, elbow in my knee, looking at the floor, thinking, I'm never going to play for this guy. And he came in the door, came across the room, slapped me on the back of the neck, messed up my hair. He said, "Son, one of these days you're going to be the best guard in football." And he turned around and walked away. And that started my motor. With that comment, he allowed me to think about being a great football player. And from that point on, I worked my tail off. I gave him everything I had. It made a profound impact on my life.
The Packers' turnaround was in full swing. In only his second season, Lombardi brought Green Bay its first division title in 16 years, and won them a trip to the 1960 NFL title game against the Philadelphia Eagles.
Clock continues to run. About 10 seconds. Packers have time maybe for one more play. Star takes the ball.
Trailing 17-13 with time running out, the Packers came up 9 yards short of their first championship under Lombardi.
He was talking about the Eagles after the ball game in our dressing room. He said, "We got beat today." But he said, "I can tell you right now, it won't ever happen again." He says this to us right after the ball game. It won't ever happen again. No one will ever beat us in a championship game again.
The sun peeks through the cloudy skies. The town of Green Bay becomes the sports capital of the world.
Lombardi's guarantee was tested the very next year, in 1961, when the Pack reached the title game for the second straight year. They were facing a team Lombardi was all too familiar with, the New York Giants. What most people didn't know was that the previous winter, Wellington Mara had approached Lombardi about returning to New York to become head coach of the Giants. One paper even reported that Lombardi had submitted his letter of resignation to the Packers.
He left New York actually presuming that he would return to New York and be the coach of the Giants.
Mara was acting on an agreement he thought was in place with Dominik Olejniczak.
Mr. Mara's view was that when he gave Mr. Olejniczak permission to talk to me to come to Green Bay, that it was understood at the time that if a position was available in New York that I was to come back. Mr. Olejniczak said he did not have that understanding.
Had Lombardi returned to the Giants, history would have told a far different story. As it was, Lombardi and Mara were still friends, right up to game time.
The night before the championship game in Green Bay, they went out to dinner, and my dad drove Mara to the restaurant, and they had a good time. And then as the dinner wound down, my dad just kind of pops up and says, "We're going to beat you tomorrow," and leaves without Mara having a ride home.
Green Bay comes up to the line. Snapping the ball, Paul Hornung off the right side, cuts it to 5, touchdown.
The Packers won 37-0. Lombardi had his first NFL championship, and the defeated Giants could only admire the coach they almost had.
Packers have won the championship.
In only 3 years, Lombardi had taken a nucleus of talent and shaped it into a team of champions. And nothing embodied Green Bay's success more than a seemingly routine running play.
Gentlemen, this is the most important play we have. It's the play we must make go. It's the play that we will make go. And it's the play that we will run again and again and again.
In Green Bay, the play was known as the power sweep. It perfectly suited Lombardi's love of precision, teamwork, and brains.
It's a kind of a complex play that looks very simple, There's a lot of things that have to happen for the play to work well. If they do this, we do that. If they do that, we do this. And we adjust to where the defense goes, so the defense is almost always wrong, and the back will run to daylight.
To Lombardi, the sweep was more than a play. It defined him.
And they ran it and ran it and ran it.
If the end has the linebacker taken in, he will come around it and seal inside. What we're trying to get is a seal here and a seal here and try to run this play in the alley.
It was run to perfection.
Lombardi didn't invent it, but he took everything to a different level than anybody else because he was Lombardi and he had an obsession that was deeper than anyone else's. He adopted it and used it as the signature of his offense.
Lombardi became the definitive expert on the power sweep and shared his enthusiasm for the play with anyone that would listen.
I saved up everything I had to go up to a coaching clinic, and Vince Lombardi was the speaker. Now, at this time, I was a young coach. I was coaching in junior college, and to be honest with you, I thought I knew it all. And I go in and I sit in the back. You know, this is how stupid I was and naive. Vince Lombardi, you know, the guy that's up there talking, and I'm sitting in the back row like I'm in church. And he talks for 8 hours on one play, the Green Bay sweep. Talked for 4 hours.
Keeping his eyes right on the numbers of the defensive man.
Took a break and came back and talked for 4 hours more. So then I left after that, and I said, I don't know a damn thing.
Having perfected the sweep by 1962, the Packers outscored every other team in the league. With a nearly flawless 13-1 record, they were one of the greatest NFL teams ever assembled. Their reward was a return trip to the title game and a rematch against the Giants.
Well, we've got a jam-packed Yankee Stadium here this afternoon.
Lombardi showed his hometown what he was made of and coached the Packers to a convincing 16-7 victory.
For the second straight year, the Green Bay Packers have won the National Football League championship.
Lombardi had built a dynasty, and Green Bay was now on the map.
It's usually a small-town kid who comes to the big city of New York and makes it. And here was Lombardi, you know, this New York City kid, born and bred, who's frustrated and was passed over and finally goes out to little Green Bay, this godforsaken place that he'd only seen once before in his life, and he made it there and became sort of a transcendent figure.
The Packers' success transformed Lombardi from an East Coast outsider to the Pope of Green Bay. He had saved a beloved franchise and restored pride to a humble corner of America. Green Bay was renamed Titletown, and Lombardi took his place among modern-day legends.
He was trying to raise football to the level of those other professions that he thought about but didn't achieve, being a priest, being a lawyer. But the truth is, he incorporated the best of all of those other professions into what he did as a football coach.
He taught us a lot more about life than he did about football. He used football to teach life.
It wasn't enough to be a football coach. That wasn't what God ordained for him. He had to see himself in a broader perspective. A teacher and a molder of young men's character.
He's very tense the first part of the week, because that's when the hard work is. But as the week goes along, I don't see him Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday night at all. It must be very hard to do what he has to do and do it alone.
Football coaching takes a great deal of time. It takes every minute of your time during the season. From the first part of June through January, there are no days off. You work every day and you work long hours. You work from 7 or 8 in the morning till 12 or 1 o'clock the next morning. I think we can work 64 give and 65 give either way, right?
My mother used to say, you don't talk to my dad on Monday and Tuesday.
You've never in your life seen anything more open than that.
Wednesday, you can kind of have a conversation with him.
Oh, shit.
Thursday begins to lighten up.
That's the best one right there. That was the best one right there.
Friday, Saturdays, he figures he's done everything he can, and he's pretty civil.
Though Lombardi was living his dream, he allowed himself little time to enjoy it. During the season, his only respite came on Sunday nights at his house in suburban Green Bay.
Sunday night after a Packer home game, Lombardi and all of his pals congregate in the basement rec room of his house in the bar down there.
I wouldn't be a bit surprised if he be the referee on the game in Milwaukee.
There are martinis and highballs, and everybody's smoking. It's the quintessence of the late 50s, early 60s. People are a little tipsy, and Lombardi, if they've won, is on top of the world. You know, he's got that loud voice and his arms around everybody, and he's laughing and trying to tell jokes himself, but not very successfully.
Make sure everybody knows you go.
You know, you're at that peak emotionally, and then you need something to get off this 50-story ledge you've been on. It's his way of, you know, kind of coming down, and with people that he trusted. You know, you have a couple scotches and be having a good time, and then all of a sudden you could just see him ratcheting and thinking about the next week.
This is Vince Lombardi. I look at this, I look at my behavior, I say, has this become a game for madmen, and am I one of them?
That's exactly what I meant. It's a game for madmen, and I'm the biggest madman of them all.
In 1963, Lombardi's Packers fell short of a third straight NFL championship. They failed to win the division again in '64, and after back-to-back second-place finishes, they bore the full brunt of their coach's madness.
Bob, how you get a man caught back there? Got a touchdown there.
What happened at 68?
I don't know what the hell happened.
I said it was against Zeke. It should have been great.
Nobody blocked on the left side. Marvin, you missed that guy every time. Hey, it's supposed to be a hell of a defensive club. It didn't look like it to me. All the way down, about 70 yards.
Booming voice of his still scares the hell out of me. You echo in the back of your mind.
Flank it this way. What the hell's going on out here? For the love of Pete, what's going on out there?
Lombardi's obsession with winning echoed louder than ever.
This is a tough and it's a cruel business. We have to produce. We're only here because we win, period. And when we lose, we're gone. Therefore, we have to win. Therefore, you have to win. And we only want winners.
We only want winners. Why is this your credo? Is it the be-all and end-all of your life?
Well, that's a tough question, Howard. In my business, there is only one place, and that's to be a winner.
On the field and off, life with Lombardi had become a day-to-day proposition.
When he came up the stairs, if he smiled at us and said good morning, we knew we were going to have a fairly decent day. But if he ignored us, we kept our heads down, we didn't talk to him, just left him alone that day.
Hi, Coach. Nothing. He was looking out the window. I said, hi, Vince. Nothing at all. Like I didn't even exist.
He was so bipolar. Of course, we didn't know. One minute he'd be up here, the next minute he'd be down here. When he got out of control, I ran to the basement. You know, turn the radio on and just stay away.
Son Vincent had spent his adolescence at his father's side.
Thank you, Vincent.
But the proximity didn't draw them any closer.
He had a temper that he didn't control very well, and he was a perfectionist. As a coach, those are pretty good qualities. As a parent, not necessarily so.
Being the son of Vince Lombardi was no easier when Vincent left to play football at the College of St. Thomas in Minnesota.
My freshman year in college, I hurt my knee. I'm obviously not playing, I'm not practicing. And they come up to play the Vikings. And he gives me a big hug, a big smile, and how you doing and everything. But he also has in the room with him Dr. Jim Nellen, who is the team's orthopedic guy. And I go in the bedroom with Nellen, and he takes my knee, and he comes out and tells my dad there's nothing structurally wrong. He's just, ligaments are stretched. My dad goes from smile, he jumps me like nobody's business. God, he jumps me. You're going to run out that thing tomorrow, put baby in it, yada. And now I got tears running down my cheeks. But ran out it the next day, and I got in the starting lineup as a freshman about 2 weeks later. He knew better than I.
With Vincent gone, the house took on an almost eerie silence.
You could hear a pin drop in our kitchen table. My mother was quiet, my father was quiet, and we just ate our dinner. I traveled with this team. That was my father's way of keeping the family together. So my suitcase laid on the floor open 12 months out of the year. I hated it. But who was I gonna tell I hated it? Daddy, I hate this?
Only one person was able to handle that chore.
My mother was the only person who could talk back to my father and get his attention.
We loved her. God, we loved her because we couldn't say anything to him. All he did is win all the time. She could.
One of the most common phrases that you could hear out of Vince Lombardi's mouth was, "Shut up, Marie." But like many marriages, he would say that in public, and then he would do exactly what she instructed him to do in private.
But it was Marie who had left her life in New York for the sake of her husband's career.
She was fairly complicated about it. She loved football. She loved him, and she loved nothing more than walking through an airport, watching people stare at him. And yet, she knew that she couldn't really compete with football, and I think that sense of emptiness manifested itself in her being depressed and becoming an alcoholic.
My mother had a drinking problem. And when things got unhappy, she'd drink.
I think my dad was not all that sympathetic. I think he saw it as a weakness, that something, you should be able to control.
On at least one occasion, Marie was unable to, as Vincent discovered when he brought home his new fiancée.
He comes home to announce he's engaged, and Marie has overdosed on pills and drinking.
I never put my finger on it until subsequent. I didn't. At the time, okay, she's sick in the hospital. I should have known my dad was falling all over himself to compensate for it.
Through thick and thin, Vince and Ree, as he called her, did have a love affair. She was completely devoted to him to the end.
God forbid she missed a football game. She never missed one. Not one.
God, family, and the Green Bay Packers. This was the trinity that defined Lombardi's life. In what order was never clear.
Here he was, a very imperfect man, trying to create something perfect. And the more he tried to create something perfect, the more he understood his own imperfections. And I think that's what he tried to deal with in church.
It was very strange. My father went to church 365 days of the year. He never missed.
Lombardi's day began at St. Willibrod's. Anyone who went there while the coach was in attendance might have been surprised at what they found.
So we're all in the front row. The priest comes in, and who's the altar boy? But Coach Lombardi. We looked at each other like, holy crap, this guy does everything. And to this day, I believe the priest kept looking at Lombardi like, am I doing it right?
got a great faith in God. I'm quite dependent upon my Maker, really. I don't think I do anything without some thought in that area. I'm a highly emotional man. I'm quick to tears and I'm quick to praise. I'm quick to all of the things. I think anyone who tries to hide their emotions, I think makes a mistake. I think you've got to do things according to your own personality. This is all part of whatever little bit of success I've had, too. I think this is most important.
Everybody grabbing out there. Nobody tackling. Just grabbing, everybody. Grab, grab, grab.
Lombardi wore his emotions on his sleeve, and his players had no trouble recognizing them.
Is it saying the angry man rules the room? Well, he did indeed. And the anger was part of it. It was part of his arsenal.
Let's have a little life out here. We look like we're half dead out here. Let's move a little bit.
Nobody could yell like he did all the time. A lot of time was for effect, clearly. I saw him one time kind of practicing some facial stuff in the mirror. You know, a grimace, a growl.
Henry Jordan had one of the famous lines about Lombardi. He treats us all alike, like dogs. It's a great line, and it's completely wrong.
Come on, Henry Jordan, you're just laying on it.
He treated every one of them differently.
Never gonna help, Henry.
He treated Henry Jordan like a dog, because that's how he'd get the most out of Jordan, just by getting him mad.
He just played us like a maestro.
Every play you're graded. In a grading system, if a guy blocks you and you get out of the block and you make the tackle for no gain, that's a 0. You did what you're supposed to do. Now, if he blocks you and you don't get out of the block, you stay blocked, that's a -2. He dogged people so much. When he gave you a compliment, even if it's just a little small one, you just took it and said, hey, he likes me. My dad always said, never let a white man pat your head. But Vince Lombardi, when you need something good, he walk up behind you, he hit you back here like this, behind your head like here. And I love it, man. I said, hey. He didn't pat you on the head, he hit you right in the back of the neck. It's kind of like his seal of approval.
Behind Lombardi's irascibility lay a deep-rooted belief that it took more than bullying to produce a team of champions.
There's a certain togetherness here that is not true in many other fields. I gave it a word. There has to be a great deal of love for each other.
He was the first coach that I ever heard refer to love in the locker room. He really believed that there was a Christian love that he could incorporate into the team, the love that binds his players together, the love that comes out of sacrifice.
Here we go, let's go. Come on, one for all for one. Let's go now.
During the radically changing 1960s, Lombardi's love for his players was put to the test.
Vince was colorblind. He didn't care who it was.
He made Dave Robinson the first black linebacker in Packer history, and then offered his support to Robinson's roommate, Lionel Aldridge, during a critical time in his life.
Lionel gave me an engagement ring, but I couldn't wear it, and I had to hide it, and I couldn't tell anybody that I was engaged to him. At that point in time, it wasn't really legal for black and whites to marry. There was a player that had married interracially a couple years before Lionel and I were thinking about it. And he'd been blackballed from all of football. So Lionel wanted to know what Lombardi's reaction would be.
Vince called him in because he'd gotten complaints about Lionel importing this white girl to Green Bay. And then Lionel told him, he said that he wanted to marry her, but he was afraid of being blackballed.
And Lombardi told him, I don't care who you marry, as long as you play good football, you keep your nose clean. Lionel called me and said, wow, I walked out of there just like shaking my head thinking, oh my gosh, he said, yeah, I still have a job so we can get married.
When he came back to me from Vince, he came right to me and told me, he said, Vince told me Vicky and I can get married. He was happy as a lark.
The issue of prejudice was especially sensitive for Lombardi given his own past. And when several team owners learned of the situation, he remained adamant in his support of Aldridge.
Pete Rozelle, the commissioner of football, got wind of it. And to Lombardi's credit, said, this is my team. You can't tell me what to do with my team. They can do what they want as long as it's okay by me. He just was amazing in the fact that if he believed in something, he fought for it.
By 1965, the bond that Lombardi had cultivated with his players translated to success on the field. After missing the playoffs 2 years in a row, his Packers were winners again and met the Cleveland Browns for the NFL title. The game was no contest.
Starr takes the ball, hands off to Hawning, sweep to the left side, he's got the block, he's inside the 10, he's at the 5, cuts into the end zone for the touchdown. The Green Bay Packers are the National Football League champions for 1965.
Lombardi was about to take his team on a historic run. A year later, the Packers lost just 2 games and advanced to the NFL championship for the 2nd straight year. The title match was in Dallas against the Cowboys and old friend Tom Landry.
Vince was very, very intense when he played against Landry. It's almost like I'm playing against my brother. I want to show him who's the boss.
Vince always felt that Tom's complicated offense, under pressure, someone was going to screw up.
That's precisely what happened. With Dallas trailing by a touchdown in the closing minutes, an offsides penalty pushed the Cowboys back to the Packers' 6-yard line. With 45 seconds remaining, Dallas was down to their last chance.
If the Cowboys go in here and kick the extra point, we're going into overtime. They've got 1 play to travel 2 yards. Meredith takes the ball, rolls out to the right. He's going to be nailed. A pass away, and it's intercepted in the end zone by Tom Brown.
The hero of the play was Dave Robinson, who had pressured Don Meredith into throwing the game-winning interception.
I really played it wrong. If I had missed Meredith, he could have walked in. Defense is seek and destroy, and I just knew this was the time that I could go get him, so I did. But it wasn't the way it's drawn up on the playboard. Consequently, Vince Lombardi gave me a -2 on the play.
The Packers were again champions of the NFL, but their celebration was short-lived. Pro football supremacy was about to be contested in the first Super Bowl, pitting Green Bay against the Kansas City Chiefs, the rival AFL. Lombardi and his Packers would be representing much more than just Green Bay.
Now he gets a letter from Wellington Mara, and the letter says, Vince, you know what this game means to us. I couldn't think of any other general I would want to take the NFL Army into battle than you in Super Bowl I.
The telegrams and calls and everything else they got put more pressure on him. The guy was absolutely just wound tighter than, to say, the nuts on a new bridge. He was just, I mean, he was uptight.
The game was far short of a sellout, but Lombardi's biggest concern was protecting the honor of the NFL.
I want you to be proud of your profession. It's a great profession. You be proud of this game, and you can do a great deal for football today. Great deal for all the players in the league and everything else. Go out there and play this ball game like I know you can play it. Let's go! Go!
3rd down and a long 4. Dawson being rushed and falls to reverse. And down the sidelines comes Willie Wood.
The final score read 35-10. Lombardi had accomplished what his NFL brethren had asked of him. But he was in no mood to celebrate, not with a bigger dream spurring him on.
I didn't get the feeling in '63 that he was going for 3 in a row, but in '67, he didn't let you forget it. Vince was a man of a single purpose, winning 3 consecutive world championships.
Each year, you have different motivating features, and at this particular time, we're going to try to repeat.
No modern-day NFL team had ever won 3 championships in a row, and Lombardi's attempt at the feat didn't come easy. The Packers were aging and racked with injuries. They looked exhausted, as did their head coach.
He drove himself and he drove his players and coaches to the point where he'd had it. You know, I thought he had just absolutely burned himself out.
I compared him to a president of the United States who is in office as a young man. He's fresh-faced and he's, all bright-eyed and everything. And after about 3 years, he looks haggard and he looks gray and he looks worn and he looks aged. In '67, Coach Lombardi looked that way. He looked gray and he looked tired.
Lombardi's health was deteriorating. He had ulcers, he had stomach problems. He might have had other more serious problems. Several times his friends urged him to get a colonoscopy. And in the horrible, immortal last words, he said, "I'm not going to let somebody stick that up my ass."
Hobbled though they were, Lombardi's Packers pressed on and returned to the NFL championship game for a rematch with the Dallas Cowboys.
The Vince Lombardi Show, featuring the head
Let's
coach.
look ahead to Sunday. The Dallas Cowboys and for the whole works.
That's right. Al, this is the big game of the year, and we're real happy we're going to play it in Green Bay. Let me say that. And our field is going to be in good shape because unless something happens to that electric blanket we have out there.
Coach Lombardi invested a great sum of money on the electric coils that went underneath Lambeau Field. They were designed to keep the field from freezing, obviously, and it was a new concept.
He said, "Let me tell you what we did to this field." He's got this city of wires underneath the turf. Throw the switch, everything's going to melt, we're going to be fine, the field's going to be in good condition.
That was Lombardi's baby, and he just loved to show people this control panel downstairs. It looked like something you'd see in a submarine. Or there were all these handles and valves and cranks and all this stuff.
We're all in there and the lights are blinking. He's a mad scientist. He doesn't know a damn thing about it. And it says field electrified.
This is my pride and joy out here, this field here. Let's not cut it up. Come on, move on.
The heating was working.
Head up, look at me, look at me.
On Saturday morning before the game, which was typical, we went through our walkthroughs and so forth out on the field. The footing, the field itself, was absolutely fabulous.
So wait.
And the Cowboys go up there and they say they want to use the field, test it. And Lombardi says, "Nobody touches my field." And they said, "The hell with that." They called up Roselle. Roselle calls Lombardi up and says, "You're damn right they're going to use that field." And the Cowboys are practicing on the 50 yards, There's no wind and it's about 21 degrees and, boy, this isn't bad at all. The field is good.
Lombardi was the world's greatest control freak. There's no question about that. But the one thing he couldn't control was weather.
And as night turned to day, Lombardi had become as helpless as the ground beneath him.
The field, it had been covered the night before. The heat was coming up through the ground and bringing the moisture with it. And as they peeled the tarp off, the field was damp and it was fairly soft. But as the cold worked on it, it started to freeze. And you could just see the field turning color, starting in the north end zone and going to the south. And all of a sudden we think, oh my God, Coach Lombardi's field is frozen.
Finally, they turned to Chuck Lane and said, "Chuck, you better go and tell Coach."
I'd probably been better off telling him that Marie was running around on him.
He was just livid. Not because of the players playing on ice. He looked bad.
And Lombardi's looking at the field, and he says, "It's going to be all right." That's terrible. It's just terrible.
The stage was set for a game that even before kickoff had earned its nickname, the Ice Bowl.
The field grew worse as the game wore on. And it was a skating rink more than a football field.
The Packers took a 14-0 lead. And then, as wind-chilled temperatures reached minus 38 degrees, their offense froze.
Footing was so bad, and the hands were so cold, and the receivers catching the ball was difficult. So one score could make a big difference.
The pitch out to Reeves. He'll throw the option pass way downfield. It is complete to Lance Ritzel. He's at the 10, the 5, and into the end zone for the touchdown. And it's the Dallas Cowboys 17, the Green Bay Packers 14. And the Packers have got their work cut out for them now.
I hate to say it, but I had lost faith in the offense. I really had, because they hadn't done a thing. They had shut the offense down completely.
So we get the ball, 4.5 minutes to go. We got 65 yards to go to score.
Starr takes the snap. He's back to throw. He's got the time. Flips out to the right side to Donnie Anderson. Gets by one man. He's at the 40-yard line. And down
and they started moving.
Flips the pass. It's complete to Chuck Mercine. He's at the 25, the 20, down to the 15, and out of bounds at about the 11-yard line. There's a minute and 11 seconds remaining in this game.
In the most adverse conditions they had ever faced, the Packers moved down the field in 9 plays and into position to score a game-winning touchdown.
Actually, I was looking for a suggestion from Jerry Kramer and Forrest Gregg as to what particular type of play and what kind of blocking that we should particularly run in that area.
Only even blocking, big odd one.
Yeah, probably odd blocking.
The players spotted a weakness. Dallas defensive lineman Jethro Pugh.
They said, we can wedge Pugh if we have to. He goes, what? I said, we can wedge Pugh if we have to. That's right.
I didn't cut Pugh off. Pugh goes down easy.
I mean, even, so he can get on the middle.
Even, yeah. Even.
All right.
It's a give and take. I'm not the complete autocrat here, you see, as everybody thinks.
The Packers had identified their target, but the real enemy was the ice.
So we called the play twice. The backs were slipping and sliding and couldn't get back to the line of scrimmage.
The handoff goes to Donnie Anderson. He's not in. The Packers call time again.
And then we take our final timeout, and Bart asked me if I could make a block.
Can you get your footing for one more wedge play?
Yeah, I think so.
So I ran to the sideline, got over there, and I said, Coach, there's nothing wrong with the play. I said, the backs simply can't get to the line of scrimmage because the ground is so hard there. I said, I'm standing upright. I can shuffle my feet and lunge in. All he said at that time was, well, then run it, and let's get the hell out of here. And I'm laughing like I am now, going back to the huddle. And I'm trying to not let anybody see me laughing because it just broke me up. That was his response.
That's all the timeouts the Green Bay Packers have. They are still inches away from that goal line.
On 3rd down with 16 seconds to go, Lombardi gambled everything on one last play.
And Landry would have called a rollout, and a lot of people would have called a rollout.
Watch that Starr now, come on. Grab him if he fakes it.
Lombardi wanted to run the wedge play. If you can't gain a yard, you don't deserve to be champions.
Here are the Packers. 3rd down, inches to go. To Bader. Starr begins the count. Takes the snap. He's got the quarterback sneak, and he's into the touchdown. And the Green Bay Packers are going to be NFL champions for the 3rd straight year.
My perspective on the last drive in the Ice Bowl is that that is the culmination of everything Lombardi and his Packers had been preparing for all of those 9 years together.
We got a little commitment, a little discipline, a little perseverance, a little preparation, a little consistency, a little intensity. We reached down, we got a little bit of Lombardi. Brookshire is interviewing Coach Lombardi.
Slow motion now as Jerry Kramer makes a key block for Bart Starr on this quarterback sneak for the winning touchdown.
And he runs a play, and Coach goes,
Way to go, Jerry! Way to go!
Nobody got a -2 on the final play of the Ice Bowl. But even as Lombardi had accomplished his goal of winning 3 straight titles, he was strangely detached.
The story's outside, nothing here.
We get in the car, and he turns to me and says, you just saw me coach my next to last football game.
Super Bowl II would be the final game Lombardi coached as a Packer. In beating the Raiders, Lombardi went out a champion. He had done what no other NFL coach had accomplished, winning 5 titles in 9 years. 2 weeks later, the Lombardi era officially ended.
Gentlemen, let me introduce to you the new head coach of the Green Bay Packers, Mr. Phil Bankston.
I think that in part it was the accumulation of the stress. I think it was partly his health. I think he was afraid, honestly, about what would happen to him if he kept coaching.
No longer head coach, Lombardi was confined to the front office, where he concentrated on executive duties.
Jets haven't doing so good, are they?
With his workload cut in half, he also had plenty of time for personal appearances.
Most times, the streets are named after the deceased. I hope this is not... I just want you to know I'm not dead.
Lombardi had become an icon.
Richard Nixon was once contemplating putting him on his ticket as vice president in 1968.
And of course, Vince Lombardi.
But in fact, Lombardi was a Kennedy Democrat.
His message, which had made him so successful on the football field,
operate on Lombardi time,
resonated with business leaders and the after-dinner crowd.
But once you have won their hearts, they'll follow you anywhere.
But in time, Lombardi grew uncomfortable with the one message that had come to define him.
Winning isn't everything, but it's the only thing. In our business, there is no second place. Either you're first or you're last.
He told me one day, I wish the hell I'd never said that. I said, well, don't you believe it? He said, what I believe is, if you go out on a football field on Sunday or any other endeavor in life, and you leave every fiber of what you have on that field when the game finally ends, then you've won. And to me, that tells a lot more than the final score. And I never made that clear.
What's the one thing you want from each and every man who plays for you?
I want him to give 100% on every play that he is in as far as the Packers are concerned.
But when his appearances were over, he went back to an office and not a football field.
I think at that point he realized that he'd made a heck of a mistake.
You'd see him on the practice field just wandering around and looking, and you're going, I turned to my mother, I said, Mom, he's so depressed. He just walks, shoulders over, like, well, I can't say anything, and I see some things that are going on wrong. And he'd walk, and he'd walk, and he'd walk. It killed him.
He's an old lion that was away from the pride.
They actually had to soundproof the booth in Lambeau Field that he would stay in to watch the Packers because he was yelling so much. They didn't want the press to hear it.
I could hear the beating on the wall when the Packers were screwing up, you know.
With the Packers headed for their first losing season since Lombardi's arrival, their old coach finally spoke to his team.
He went in and talked to him, and I was sitting at the desk doing some work and talking on the phone, and he came in, so it was just he and I in there. And he said, there's a goddamn many things I wanted to say to him. He said, I don't know why I have to whip him all the time. And I said, Coach, you trained him with the whip, you can't put it down. He said, yeah. And all of a sudden he takes his chair, he was just inside the door, he takes it over and puts it facing into the corner. And he breaks down and cries. He just bawled like a baby. There's so goddamn many things I wanted to tell him.
I was sitting at my desk one day and he called me in to take dictation, and I thought it was just regular dictation, and all of a sudden I realized he is dictating his letter of resignation to me. I was into a couple of lines and I thought, oh my God, he's actually leaving.
I'm under contract with the Packers as a general manager for the next 5 years, and I've asked for release from that contract to take a position with the Washington Redskins as their executive officer, also a coach, and also for a substantial position with equity.
When he left, there were people who hated him, who wanted to change the name of Lombardi Way. He was a Packer, and he was supposed to be a Packer till he died.
It was like, God is here. It was amazing.
In spite of what some of you may think, I can't walk across the Potomac even when it's frozen.
Like the Packers in '58, the Redskins were one of the worst teams in the NFL. They needed a miracle, and were counting on Lombardi to bring them one. Reaching into his past to bring the Redskins into the future, he met with one-time Giants linebacker Sam Huff, who had recently retired from the Redskins.
I said to Coach Lombardi, I want to come back and play, and I can coach the linebackers and play for you. And Lombardi said, you think you could get another year or two? And I said, I know I can for you.
The Redskins already had their Bart Starr in gifted but free-spirited Sonny Jurgensen.
He wasn't talking about rebuilding and going down the road to win. He was talking about now. He was talking about right then. And you believe that. He made everybody believe in his program.
Lombardi had never had a losing season and wasn't about to start now. In '69, he coached the Redskins to their first winning record in 14 years. With Jurgensen leading the way, they won 7 games, the same win total posted by Lombardi's first team in Green Bay.
Just to have the chance to play for him. That was the highlight of my whole career. I'm glad I had that experience. If I'd have had it longer, it would have been cheating because it was easy.
With the stress of the season still lingering, Lombardi went to Green Bay to see old friends.
He comes over the house and greeted him outside with a nice big hug and handshake, and we come inside to take him on a cook's tour of the home. And my wife said, Coach, none of this would have been possible without you. He gets up, tears are coming from his eyes. He goes across the room, gives my wife a great big hug, turns around, hugs me, and goes out the front door.
I was in the office looking at films, and he was coming down the hallway. And he looked terrible. And I said, Coach, are you okay? And he said, no, Sam. He said, I really feel sick. And I said, well, why don't you go see the team doctor? And he did.
Washington Redskins coach Vince Lombardi had a 2-foot section of his colon removed today after surgeons discovered a tumor during an exploratory operation.
In late July, Lombardi addressed the Redskins before a preseason game.
I'll never forget it. We were going to play Baltimore Colts. And he said, I want you guys to know why I brought you here. From now on, I'm not going to be with you. But by God, you're going to be a winner.
The next day, on July 27th, Lombardi was readmitted to Georgetown University Hospital for a second surgery.
I remember getting a call, follow-up, that the surgery wasn't successful and that he was terminal.
When word got out about Lombardi's condition, legions of disciples began a pilgrimage to Washington.
Every Green Bay Packer went to say goodbye to him. And all the Washington Redskins, the Giants. And once it all came out that the coach was going to die, those players flocked in there like, it was like, I have to say goodbye.
I go in and he said, you know, I've been lying here thinking about this. American Football Conference runs a lot of 34 defense instead of the 4-3 defense in the NFC. And I'm going, here's a man that, you know, it's just, I don't know how long he has to live. And he's sitting there thinking about ways to beat defenses.
It was 6 or 7 o'clock in the evening when I went into his room. He opened his eyes and looked at me, and I went over and took his hand and told him how much I appreciated our time together and that he'd had a great impact on my life. And I loved him for that.
I took the train down, and he was actually alone. He knew who I was, and he kind of laughed, and I squeezed his arm. And we talked about the weather or anything. What do you say? And I remember grabbing him by the arm as I was leaving.
He looked at me and he said, "Frank, it really hurts."
Vince Lombardi, the famed football coach of the Green Bay Packers and later the Washington Redskins,
He is gravely ill in a Washington hospital and is said to be near death.
Lombardi's wife issued a statement at Georgetown University Hospital in Washington, which said he was suffering from an extraordinarily virulent form of cancer.
We'd heard on the 6 o'clock news that he was in the hospital, and then my mother subsequently called me that night or the next morning, I can't remember, saying it was serious business and I better come out. My dad and I didn't communicate too well. I'm sure it was both of our faults. I never had any doubts my dad loved me, but he was hard. I had to probably grow up to his level, and I was probably getting there, but didn't have time.
He said, "Come here." And somehow he got his hand out, and he put my hand in his, and he just squeezed it. And then I realized that my father was going to die.
Mr. Vincent Lombardi, coach and executive vice president of the Washington Redskins, died at 7:12 a.m. today at Georgetown University Hospital.
I usually wake up in the morning listening to Paul Harvey, and I opened up my eyes, it was raining, and I heard still can't talk about this.
It is a gray day in Green Bay, Wisconsin.
I heard Paul Harvey on the radio saying that the heavens were weeping in Green Bay because Vince Lombardi had passed away.
They said the town ran on Lombardi time, 15 minutes ahead of everywhere else. And elsewhere, in an era in which many sought to deify the common man, some of us continued to thrill to the accomplishments of the uncommon ones: Rockne, Leahy, Bud Wilkinson, Bear Bryant, and the incomparable Vince Lombardi. Vince Lombardi and his uncompromising determination to be the best could not alone inspire us all. Let that be his epitaph.
Unbelievable that this great man at age 57 had died. He was too darn tough and too mean to die, you know, but he died. It was something that nobody could really comprehend.
On Labor Day 1970, 4,000 mourners silently filled the streets of Midtown Manhattan. From every corner of America they came, the anonymous and the anointed. Players, executives, even mentors gathered their collective grief as they filed into St. Patrick's Cathedral. Vincent Thomas Lombardi was finally home.
Said it was the first time I really shed a tear at a white funeral, see? And it didn't mean it derogatorily. I was just trying to say that this guy, even though he was white, he was like a father to me.
The saddest part of his death was his players. You could see the sadness inside of them. He was amazing. He really was amazing.
Vince Lombardi fought the good fight. We believe in that last struggle with death, this man won the final victory.
We're in the car, and we went into Jersey. I went like this to my brother, and I said, "Look." And all these people, they were lined up on hills everywhere, waving the flag as my father went by. That made the day.
I think he had a profound effect on people. I think a lot of his players realized that they never would have come close to being the players and the human beings that they subsequently became without him. I don't know that you even had to be a player for him to feel that way. Just by his presence and the way he conducted himself, he had that strong faith. And yet he yelled, screamed at you, he would embarrass you. And if he did chew on you, it's because he thought at the moment that it was appropriate and that it would do you some good. He never did anything out of malice. He had a good heart. Everything came from his heart, it really did. People say to me, oh, gee, you know, couldn't have been easy. I say, you know, you're right, but if it's 17, 16, 15, you'd say, okay, this is it. This is how it's all going to play out. I would have said, well, give me a pen. Where do I sign off? I think he would have done this.
Someone to give you a testimony, it's a very emotional type of thing. Gives you with a great many thoughts, really, as to why and as to who and to where and whether you're particularly deserving. I'm very fortunate to be respected in my own profession. I think I've got to place a great deal of value on that. I've got to have a great deal of gratitude for my parents, for my wife, for my 2 children, and certainly for all of my superiors over the years. What I am today, let me put it that way, is all of these people were a part of it. A man should get, maybe at the end of his life, one testimony. Everybody should go through it once. Once is enough. As far as myself is concerned, I know my future happiness has to be some other place. I'm going to try to do these things as well as I can here in order to attain someday maybe a greater happiness. That's about the size of it.
This has been a presentation of HBO Sports.